I was a child when the 71 war broke out. I remember that. We were in Delhi and I remember the blackouts. I remember the sirens. I remember the rumors that the Pakistanis have poisoned our drinking water supply. I remember the terror.
We have to make sure that no one in the world assumes that we are either reluctant or incapable of taking some tough political decisions, of exercising sovereignty, sometimes in its most extreme form, while acknowledging that we are sensible, rational actors. In this crazy, turbulent, uncertain world, we have to drop this shibboleth of 2% of GDP as a defense budget and seriously think of a decade of 4 to 5% investment in defense to build up that capacity for this century. Somewhere between now and 2030, when we reach the $6 to 7 to 8 trillion GDP mark, we will have sufficiently high defense spending that could allow us to make it nearly impossible for China. We could deny China the right to be adventurous on the Himalayas. I think one of the biggest mistakes we made at some point of time was to not have $100 billion of Chinese investments in India. If I have a $100 billion trade deficit, I should have had Chinese money locked into India's economic future, and that would have been, for example, my safety net vis-a-vis Chinese behavior. If you look at India's own future, there are perhaps three most important aspects to its economic journey. One, we are going to be greener than any large economy ever. We are a greener $5 trillion economy than ever was. We are going to be far more sustainable in our approach to 10 trillion, and we are going to be the first green 15 trillion giant. Our green transition is our economic offering. Our digitalization and our technology platform and our digital future is our economic offering, right? And our youth, young knowledge economy that we must invest into is the only industrialization that is going to be sustainable for India's future. We are not going to build mass manufacturing. The only truly non-aligned country in the world was, the geography was EU. EU was the only non-aligned country. Energy from Russia, security from America, markets from China, and virtues from God. Poland, for example, is the go-to economy. It is the fastest growing European economy. Its per capita income is now Spain or higher than Spain. It's going to become the third or fourth or fifth largest, richest country in Europe. Can you imagine?
Wow.
Poland, right?
It's incredible.
Look at that story. 1991, devastated, and look at the story today, right? So their journey is no less dramatic as ours in some sense. We were $400 billion turn of the century. We are $4.3 trillion sitting now, 9x in 25 years, right? So Poland is the India of Europe. That's what I go and tell them. You might have a greater affiliation to a person in Napa Valley than the neighbor 50 meters from your home, or perhaps in the same apartment complex. You might be more in touch with those 10,000 miles away than with your next door neighbor. Thoda चीनी है, थोड़ा दूध है, हमारा culture खत्म हो गया है. So in many ways, when Indians start defending free speech like Americans do, I say this is an American here, right? So there are a number of Indians who today shout on television about an evangelical free speech, and I appreciate it, by the way. But we have some cultural moorings. We are too tightly packed in our diversity to keep poking each other in the nose.
And there was a minister who recently really set the internet on fire by saying that our startups are good delivery boys and girls, but they're not into high tech.
When I was in my middle 30s, there was one economy that was $4 trillion. That economy had a per capita income of $2,600 per capita. That same country was to bail out Greece and Portugal and Italy in the next 5 years when they had a financial crisis. And that same $4 trillion economy in the next 10 years was to become the number one trading partner to over 100 countries. That country was China in 2008. That country is India today in 2024.
Absolutely.
Over $4 trillion, $2,600 per capita income. In the next 10 years, India would have changed the lives of citizens in India, but in 100 other countries with how they engage with them and their economics and political system.
Welcome to the Growing India podcast. I'm Monika Halan, and I'm here to take you on a journey where you meet thought leaders across the spaces of geopolitics, policy, and economics. From the macro to the micro, we are not going to miss the woods for the trees. Although he needs no introduction, but I will read out some milestones. Dr. Samir Saran is the president of the Observer Research Foundation, the top Indian think tank that is actually shaping global discourse. He's a thought leader in geopolitics, technology, and climate policy. He curates the very high-profile Raisina Dialogue, which is India's premier platform on geopolitics and geoeconomics. Dr. Saran has a PhD from the Global Sustainability Institute UK and degrees from the London School of Economics and Manipal Institute of Technology. He's the author of 5 books, advises the World Economic Forum, and Dr. Saran frequently influences the global discourse on geopolitics and geoeconomics. I am so delighted to have you here with me, Samir. Welcome to the Growing India podcast. Thank you so much, Samir, sparing time from your grueling traveling schedule. I don't know how you do it, but I think India wants to say thank you to you that you do this so we all benefit. And my viewers are going to benefit today because I want you to deconstruct a lot of things which are happening, and a lot of stuff is happening right now in the world. And we are not being able to really draw lines between the different dots and get a full picture. So what we'll do is I will move through 3 broad topics. Crisis. Crisis will lead to opportunity. And then we'll try and talk about the new world order. We'll do some blue sky thinking. So I'm going to start with crisis, and the first crisis, of course, is war. But we've, in a larger context, and you mentioned something the other day that for the last 25 years, a person born in 2020 has seen nothing but crisis.
Correct.
And the cycles between each mega crisis is getting shorter and shorter. So there is a world which is very different right now than it was ever before. And it's, I think, a symptom of the time also. Everything is faster. The first crisis is war. And we are recording today on May 2nd. And we don't know if we escalate into a full-blown war with India and Pakistan get into a hot war. I was a child when the 71 war broke out. I remember that. We were in Delhi, and I remember the blackouts. I remember the sirens. I remember the rumors that the Pakistanis have poisoned our drinking water supply. I remember the terror. What does a war do? People need to know, to an economy, to growth, to infrastructure.
So Monika, first let me thank you for inviting me to this new initiative of yours that seeks to take conversations to a whole new constituency. Let me also thank you for helping India save and invest and for holding so many hands and helping many of us get over our inhibitions and start
stay the course
and stay the course through the turbulence, even in the markets, by the way. So it's not just the political crises, but also the financial turbulence that is accompanying us these days as elections unfold. And of course, thank you for actually putting together the series that in some ways I'm sure, like your books, will be responding to specific questions that many people are currently grappling with, and hopefully your guests will be competent enough to keep up with you. So, to the answer on war. Look, is war a devastating political action? It is, right? It is a means of politics which is gory, which is bloody, which leads to all sorts of losses, both lives and property, and of course, in India's case, it may have implications on its economic trajectory and its trade and partnerships and lots of consequences. So war should be the last resort, and I'm not sure many of us understand the seriousness of choosing that political action, right? So I'm not saying we should not be prepared for it, or we should not be able to exercise it when everything else fails, but it should be certainly the last political decision step that we take. It does not mean that certain measured aggressive action, muscular action, cannot be taken to address certain political means, objectives that you seek to achieve. However, once those are taken, the escalatory ladder can surprise you, and how soon you escalate would be a consequence of the other side and some other factors as well.
Whether
so you are no longer in control.
Whether it's a 6-day or it's a Russia-Ukraine, we don't know.
You don't know whether it will be a limited border conflict.
Correct.
Like most of India-Pakistan conflicts have been in the past, or can it be a full-blown persistent,
Yeah.
never-ending conflict that we will all be seeking off-ramps for. So I think we have to be a little careful in going down that path. On social media, it is fashionable to bay for
Right.
blood and to seek conflict,
Right.
because like you said, none of us have seen a real war since 1971, and many of us.
Those of us old enough to remember
Correct.
are terrified.
I mean, to be honest, I'm a 71 born, so everyone knows my age now.
Yeah.
I was born in 1971.
Now they also know my age.
They also know your age. But I was born in 1971, and I have never seen the conflict my parents' generation have lived through. Donating clothes, donating
Gold.
supplies, donating salary, donating, contributing. So I think while it is easy on social media to conduct a war, it has more real world implications on all of us that we should be mindful of. And that's why I always tell people, perhaps you should read, perhaps you should watch documentaries
Very
rather
tall order
than
right now.
Instagram reels. You should perhaps get a sense of conflict from a more real perspective to make up your mind. But I do not for a moment believe that India should allow any assessment in the neighborhood or beyond. We are now a global actor, and I hope we're going to be discussing that. But for example, 1/3 of all Indian homes have Argentinian cooking oil in the kitchen, right? If we are going to have acreages for rare earth in South America, which is going to shape our energy requirements for the future, we are now a country that is implicated by South America. We have our largest strategic partnership with the Americans. We have our oldest partnership with the Russians. We have a very complex relationship with China. From New Zealand, from the Pacific to Peru, we are literally now an actor present everywhere. So for us, we have to make sure that no one in the world assumes that we are either reluctant or incapable of taking some tough political decisions, of exercising sovereignty, sometimes in its most extreme form, while acknowledging that we are sensible, rational actors, and who will, in many ways, use all other means possible before choosing this action. So we should not be trigger happy, but we should not be seen as a country without muscles. And I think that's the balance we need to strike, right?
So just like the Pandavs, basically go on trying to avert war, but if it is inevitable, then you do what you have to do.
Then we have to excel.
You are all in.
Then we have to develop capabilities of being decisive actors when it comes to conflict.
You think we are?
Fingers crossed. I don't think we have spent enough over the last 20 years. I don't think we have spent enough. We have a depleted Air Force fleet. We have vacancies still to fill in our armed forces, in the land forces. We have a Navy that I believe is fairly competent in the neighborhood. But as our power projection grows and as our exposure to the global landscape that I was just trying to explain becomes more expansive, our blue water capabilities need to be invested into. So I think as a country, I think we have to also, in this crazy, turbulent, uncertain world, we have to drop this shibboleth of 2% of GDP as a defense budget and seriously think of a decade of 4 to 5% investment in defense to build up that capacity for this century. Have we been doing that? No. But to be fair, we have decided to lift hundreds of millions of Indians to better state of living, and we have spent a large amount of our national resources in building infrastructure, in signing a free trade agreement with ourselves, or creating a GST framework or a single economic unit. Even those are incomplete projects in some sense, but we have made bold strides in the last 10 to 15 years of transforming this country. Essentially, I think one of the areas where we need to now focus in the coming decade, knowing that the neighborhood that we live in is not the one we would have chosen had we been given a right to design.
Can't choose family or neighbors.
Right? So because of the neighborhood we live in, on both sides, we need to think about really ramping up.
So this whole guns versus butter, that's classic economic debate. We've gone for roti instead of guns. I think that part is fairly
and I
secure.
think if we do it sensibly, the process of acquiring those muscular capabilities could be an economic activity in itself, and could be providing us butter as well. So I think we now need to focus on a productive and efficient military industrial complex which has private participation, startups, entrepreneurships, the deaf tech sectors and the space tech sectors and the cyber tech sectors. We really need to look at the neighborhood, spot the business opportunity in building the capacities to rebuff the bad actors who we are surrounded by.
Is there a policy thought in this space that these are the points where we can actually do both guns and butter?
I think the policy thought is there. I think the political leadership has understood this. I think we have not necessarily fully embraced it.
That's an opportunity. We'll come to the opportunity, but let me just stay with the war. We've suspended the Indus Water Treaty, but it's not easy to stop a flow of water or build dams or reservoirs. And how will, suppose we were to escalate the water chess move, one, how does the international community respond to that? And I think our government is very sensitive to comments on international fora. And China has upstream water that it can also play its chess move. So in the two, where do you think this water story goes?
Look, it's always, in many ways, a big decision to put in abeyance or abrogate an international agreement.
Correct.
Right? And this is not something that we have not considered earlier. And like I had mentioned, in the instruments that we have of political action, the Indus Water Treaty is perhaps a notch more preferable than a full-scale escalation.
Right.
So for me, it is something that we have used to prevent being seen as trigger-happy. We are gradually ramping up the political and the sharp edge of Indian diplomacy and Indian political action on an errant neighbor who, by the way, was malignant as a project in 1947, the project of building Pakistan.
Correct.
It was a malignant project based on identity and religion and nothing else, literally. And it is cancerous as a manifestation. So we are dealing with a very difficult to fix actor, irrational. Self-harm is the national motto of Pakistan. And that state has been created for the service of the army, right? Army needs a supply chain for its theatre, and the state offers that theatre. In many ways, it is not easy to deal with them. Now, is the Indus Water Treaty consequential? Yes. Is it going to change the politics of Pakistan? No. There are limitations to what you can do as an upstream country, and certainly there are limitations to what you can do if you have avoided building the capabilities on those rivers over the last 7 decades.
Correct.
In many ways, we have not even fully utilized our own rights under that treaty.
Correct.
We have not even fully utilized the capabilities we were allowed to have, because I don't know, in odd sort of a way, since we are in a world where everyone is talking about populism and being populist. We were internationally populist very early on. We were lobbying for China at the UN. We were ceding our water rights to Pakistan. We were in a.
It's a moral grandstanding.
So I call it international populism.
Yeah, and on the backs of people who are hungry and unclothed.
Correct.
You are doing.
So we, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying in some sense that was populism of another variety.
Right.
That was deleterious for the sovereign itself, a very young, fledgling, like you said, largely poor sovereign, right? So in many ways, the Indus Water Treaty was not fully utilized by India for its own benefits. And the hydel infrastructure, the projects that we could have built around water and irrigation, we had given Pakistan a veto on our development in north of India. And I think that veto at the very least has now been removed. So the good thing with all of what has happened is that we have finally removed that creeping veto that Pakistan had acquired over what we can do with our rivers. Can we do enough to hurt them? I don't think so, because we
not
don't have
short term, right?
Not short term.
Yeah.
But over the next decade, I think we can use this flexibility that is available to us to make sure the Indus should serve Hindustan. And I think that is what we should try and achieve.
So short term, we are not seeing anything, there's no immediate win.
I mean,
it gives
unpredictability, so it will hurt them.
Okay.
The flow of water can be really unpredictable and therefore difficult to manage for the downstream.
Yeah.
But look,
will we use it? Because finally, then there is this whole thing that common people get affected, and why would India, as a mature democracy,
there is also a collateral there.
Yes.
So I think there, like I said, there are limited effects of what we can do with the current state of infrastructure that we have. But over the next 10 to 15 years, we can really change.
And how does China play its cards? Because it's upstream to us. Look, on the Brahmaputra.
Look, I don't think every river system is the same.
Okay.
And Chinese, especially if you're looking at the northeast, and if you're looking at the Brahmaputra, for example, 85 to 90% of the Brahmaputra water is collected from, after the river has left the Chinese territory.
Except that if they do something upstream,
again, it will have some consequence. But most of the water we collect is collected through the water-fed systems from the monsoons and other streams that really make it into that mighty river once it enters India, Bangladesh, and thereafter, right? So I think again the Chinese, there is this big bend that they're building a dam on, and they can drive. I think there is ORF has done a very interesting paper. On I think, if I remember, my colleagues from Calcutta.
We'll put the paper in the show links.
Yes. So I think a paper from Calcutta where we think that it's again a little bit of a hyperbole on the capacity of China to really do significant damage using the dam that they are building on the bend of a river as it turns towards us. But of course, some unpredictability as an upstream can always be induced into the downstream. Luckily for us, we are a rain-fed system, and for us, the unpredictability of the monsoon is still the single biggest source of water insecurity, and not what our neighbors can do to us.
Okay, so I'm going to stay with China. It's a difficult relationship. Last few months have seen a de-escalation, but the fact remains that China is not a friend. Now, I want to ask the question at two levels, again, micro and macro. We have $100 billion deficit. We can't stop buying Chinese goods. And even after Doklam, there was this whole do not buy Chinese goods. It had no impact. So as individuals, we are unable to stop buying cheap Chinese goods. This trade deficit is something that China has an advantage over us, I would argue. So that's the first question. As an individual, what do you do with this problem called China? And then strategically for India, can you imagine if India and China were actually, we were different, we were not adversaries. Could you imagine the Eastern Bloc that would be created? It's never going to happen, right?
Look, China is the big question of our times for India. I mean, for the world generally.
For the world.
But look, none of them have a 4,000 kilometer border that we do, right? And in that sense, China is both a clear and present danger if that relationship goes south, and it could be a huge bountiful of opportunity if it goes north. And I don't think that we should lose hope on the latter, even as we prepare for the former. In some sense, if you ask me what should be the principle of India's China policy, my answer would be simplistic but true. We need to have political muscularity to rebuff Chinese expansionism, and we should have nimble economic embraces that should be able to grab the Chinese opportunities. So in some sense, our policy paradigm has to be at the cleft of political muscularity and a warm economic embrace. How do we maximize both of these? Strengthen ourselves and make ourselves capable of exploiting the economic flows that could shape us. Now, the balance of trade, we have a $100 billion deficit with China. We have a $80 billion positive with the Americans. There are consequences of economic realities of different geographies, and we should not necessarily emphasize these differentials.
Okay.
Trump is as worried about the deficit with many
Right. I will come to that.
as we are worried about the deficit
Right.
with China. We have to find ways of creating codependencies, and it is not going to happen through the same flow itself. We'll have to create other sectors or other domains or other possibilities.
Examples?
For example, I think one of the biggest mistakes we made at some point of time was to not have $100 billion of Chinese investments in India. If I have $100 billion trade deficit, I should have had Chinese money locked into India's economic future, and that would have been, for example, my safety net vis-a-vis Chinese behavior. I don't have, in many ways, a Chinese equity invested into my future.
Skin in the game.
A skin in the game. So I needed some of their skin in my game, and I don't have that, right? So I think it need not be based on just the trade flows. We could create codependencies in different ways. So I think we have to now start thinking about those 4 or 5 or 6 sectors where they are interested. We have a need, and can we build some of those capabilities? Can we have Chinese enterprises? Because luckily for us, Chinese enterprise is largely the enterprise that belongs to the Communist Party of China.
Correct.
So therefore, there is no private money in China. It is the CCP money that is going to come into your country, and that allows us to leverage their in many ways stakes in our future for our benefit. So I think, for example, I'm just giving you one example. It could also have been different, and I'll just come to a couple of ideas there. But look, there is nothing to suggest that we can't be partners. I don't think we can be partners under Xi Jinping, because he has changed the nature of the Chinese political ambitions completely. His long march has become a fast march, and he's an impatient man. Perhaps he wants legacy. He wants to be the Mao Zedong of the new China, of having reunified Taiwan, of redrawn the map, of created a G1 world where China dominates, and maybe he has his own personal ambitions that are fueling a more combative China in the global system. But it does not mean that the next round of political change in that country, because luckily for us, no one lasts forever. So, the next round of political change may not have a very different.
It's a dice which can roll either way.
However, India should not be betting on it. Like I said, 4 to 5% expenditure on defense to make it costly for China to try to change the map of the Himalayas. We should take a leaf out of their own book. We don't have to be as big as them. We only have to be big enough to make it costly for them to be adventurous. I think somewhere in the vicinity of 2030, and that's something I wrote in my book on China in 2019, I think Pax Seneca, where I actually argued that somewhere between now and 2030, when we reach the 6 to 7 to $8 trillion GDP mark, we will have sufficiently high defense spending that could allow us to make it nearly impossible for China. We could deny China the right to be adventurous on the Himalayas. Pretty much what the Chinese did in 2015 to the Americans in South China Sea. And they could really change the map of South China Sea, because it was now nearly impossible for the Americans not to have significant consequences if they intervened. And I think we need those area denial capabilities that will prevent the Chinese from acting out in our neighborhood, whether it's the Indian Ocean, whether it's the Himalayas, whether it is even parts of the Western Indian Ocean that is our important trading route, right? So China is a serious neighbor in more than one way, serious in terms of how do we manage our economic linkages. They're growing. Even when we had 200,000 troops on each side facing off with 5 meters of space between them, we grew by 7 to 8%. Right? So it is an economic relationship that even we realize, because we are pragmatic folks.
And after the whole tariff thing, India does become more important for China.
We become more important for China. China becomes more important for our Make in India endeavors. All supply chains currently start from Beijing. So in many ways, that as we build an alternate to China, as we build ourselves as a hub, as a manufacturing hub for at least certain sectors, in the beginning, we will be leaning on Chinese supply chains. You know, the Apple story in India is written by Chinese SMEs, because the phone that we assemble here is fueled by the components that are still made and manufactured in mainland China, right? So the point I'm trying to say is that you cannot ignore the fact that you will have to build very pragmatic and yet forward-looking economic policies.
And is that being thought of and done? Do they have this big picture, long-term vision?
No, I think the Prime Minister gets it. I think the Prime Minister
but
gets
there
it.
are, it doesn't, you need more people getting it.
I think the advantage of India is that we have, you know, what I think Nicholas Taleb talks about. We are anti-fragile by design, which basically means that there is no centralization of decision making, and there is no one single thought that defines how we move. And because of our federal construct, because of the states coming into their own, sometimes competing, sometimes defying the center, sometimes choosing their own courses, because of businesses, you know, having absolutely, most of them having absolutely nothing but eye on profits and bottom lines, and therefore sometimes being oblivious to geopolitical realities. As a whole, we are anti-fragile. As a sum of all our parts, we sometimes make curious and crazy decisions. But overall, it allows us to be a far more flexible ecosystem, maybe not the most efficient ecosystem.
Yeah, it's the cost of democracy.
It's a cost of being democratic, plural,
diverse. Literally, I mean, you can just move faster if there is one person deciding and there is no way you can protest. So I want to move actually to the next crisis, which is trade and tariff. So we know that dollar as a reserve currency has bestowed a lot of advantages to the US, cheaper cost of borrowing, greater influence in the global financial system, seigniorage, but it also runs a very large trade deficit. For any other country whose currency was not the reserve, this would have meant currency depreciation. But the dollar didn't depreciate simply because you had enough buyers in the market. Now, in this context, the Trump's Liberation Day wasn't so much about tariff rates, as the formula then proved, as it was with trade deficits, which is what he wanted to attack. Now, how do you see, because he has blinked many times, the bond market, you know, the yields go up. I remember tweeting that day when I saw the bond yields going up, I said, okay.
This is the opposition in America.
No, it's going to blink. He's going to blink.
I mean, and the bond market is the opposition.
Of course, it's the markets. So how do you, so just very briefly, like, what is happening? Is there a strategy? Is it whimsical? As his tweets sometimes might suggest. What is the end game? He's just getting people on the negotiating table, or is there a larger strategy in place?
I think you got it right, Monika. I think he's bringing everyone onto the negotiating table. I think he is not wedded to any single pathway. He is far more pragmatic than we give him credit for. Of course, we are all blinded by his trigger-happy twittering, or Xing. Or his now truth platforming that he does. So we are all blinded by his rather sharp and frequent the policy announcements through social media platforms. But we are not all appreciative of the fact that he's not as careless as he would like us to believe he is. There is a method to his madness. So
it's a carefully constructed persona, because again, I have heard people who meet him and know him.
He has a performative profile that amuses, enthralls, attracts many of those who support him.
It's almost like distraction.
Correct.
That you play
While
with
he has a deeper game.
Okay.
He has a deeper game. You know, I'll give you an answer. If you look at some of the core Biden policies of the last 4 years, the decoupling with China on technology, what was it called? The small yard, high fence policy. The American reindustrialization policy, it was called IRA in the Biden era, right? The Indo-Pacific and Quad strategy, which affects us most, or the India partnership in some sense. The ISET and the technology partnership. These are all carry forwards of Trump 1.0. There is nothing that Trump decided to do in his first term, in the big questions of our times, that Biden did not carry forward.
Correct.
If Trump was so much of a novice or was so careless in his political thinking, we would have seen major turnarounds.
Right.
Biden took forward Trump.
All
And
the tariffs remained.
IRA was a muscular industrialization policy that was incentivizing American manufacturing over anyone else in the world. It was creating nightmares in Europe because it privileged hydrogen production in America over the green agenda in EU, for example, right? And in some ways, the Make America Great Again was repackaged by Biden during his presidency, and has now come back in a new avatar.
In a nice, good, dramatic format.
So in a dramatic format. So for me, I see continuity. I don't see crisis here. I see continuity from a country that is seeking to redefine itself in the 21st century. It is tired of running deficits to clear other people's mess. And it is now a population that truly believes that a large part of the benefits of globalization have now either been concentrated in a very small layer in America, right, and in a small layer elsewhere. And they want a fair share of the sacrifices they have made as peoples. Like in most countries, they are, courtesy social media, courtesy the communication methods available today, courtesy the leadership that is more responsive to the streets now in America, in India, in many other parts of the world, they are demanding more accountability and more responsiveness from the people. And Trump and whoever comes after him, be it Democrat, be it Republican, is not going to be able to escape from the fact that the main street is now questioning the elites and their formulas for deciding their futures, and American policy is a reflection of that. Trade deficit, the dollar dominance allowed America to do that, but everyone realizes that there are limits to these large deficits that it has run. It is on the brink. It is facing inflationary pressure.
34 trillion of debt.
Correct. It is facing inflationary pressure.
Right.
For someone like me who visits that country 6 times a year because we have our office in Washington DC, but I know that what used to cost me $37 now, that I used to have a fixed quantity of what I bought for my 2 days in DC. From $37, it has now gone up to $60. So I see in the last 2 years, I've started paying 50 to 60% more. So it's pinching America. It's pinching middle America. It is pinching the non-urban America. It's also pinching the urban America. And everyone is upset. In many ways, Trump lost to the pandemic and Biden lost to inflation, or the Democrats lost to inflation. And Donald Trump this time around is not necessarily going to allow performance in the Wall Street to overshadow his own sense of legacy making. That would be to create a new America for the 21st century.
It seems a bit chaotic. With
disruptions are chaotic.
Yeah.
It is, like us, an extremely diverse country. It has its politics that, like us, is in many ways mitigated in every different geography in different ways. They are 50 independent units coming together as a country. We are perhaps 35 or so, right? So America is very similar to us, perhaps equally loud, perhaps equally argumentative, and somehow because of that, equally anti-fragile. I am not worried about American action. I think whether it is the bond markets, whether it is states that don't agree with Donald Trump, whether it is certain regulators who don't take the cues from the White House, America will eventually produce an outcome which will be shaped by Trump but moderated by the rest of it. So in some sense, like in India, you have political leadership that gives you direction, but we have enough checks and balances to allow to allow a smoother transition than we think we want, than we actually hope for or wish for. I would like a greater disruption in our economic thinking in this country, for example, but it is moderated because we are constrained, right? The same way he is constrained by a diverse America.
And he's got literally a short runway before the next election.
And they have
same problems.
They are also in an election.
So I'm going to move again, because of tariffs and because of Trump, Europe has sort of been shaken up, woken up. And at the 10th Raisina dialogue, I felt, I watched a few of the videos, that from a wallflower, India became the belle of the ball for EU. What was the conversation? Like suddenly it was like, you're my best friend now.
I think it's taken some time to happen, longer than I thought it would.
Okay.
In 2020, if I remember correctly, Ursula von der Leyen was the chief guest at Raisina. At that particular time, we had signed the Trade and Technology Council partnership with the Europeans. That was the only second such arrangement Europe had entered into after the Americans. So we were the second geography that had signed that partnership. And yet we underperformed. Then we had, the Porto summit where all of the leaders met with the Prime Minister. Courtesy the pandemic, it couldn't happen in person, it happened virtually. And now you have all the commissioners ever, first time ever, come to the same geography. End of February, the Europeans descended on us and said India is the future.
Wallflower to belle of the ball.
Like you said. So we became, in some sense, the object of their affections. Now, this transition is important for us. If you look at India's own future, there are perhaps three most important aspects to its economic journey. One, we are going to be greener than any large economy ever. We are a greener $5 trillion economy than ever was. We are going to be far more, sustainable in our approach to 10 trillion, and we are going to be the first green 15 trillion giant. Now, these are all forward-looking statements, but I hope we achieve these. But I don't see any other way, right? So our green transition is our economic offering. Our digitalization and our technology platform and our digital future is our economic offering, right? And our youth and therefore the young knowledge economy that we must invest into is the only industrialization that is going to be sustainable for India's future. We are not going to build mass manufacturing. We keep talking about manufacturing. Yeah. Our manufacturing is going to be boutique, it's going to be high-end, it's going to be sectoral. But our largest industrialization is the fourth industrial revolution or the fifth industrial revolution, which is based on the human mind and its ability to work with machines and artificial intelligence and other emerging sectors to create better standards of life and existence for peoples of this country, right? So all three of these have Europe as an important ingredient. Our earliest forms of industrialization were fueled through our partnership with Europe. So if you look at the oldest companies in India, you would find they are normally from North Europe or West Europe.
That's
right? And I have no doubt that the most important technology partnerships for the future would be what India builds now for building, green hydrogen capabilities for space tech and for defense tech and for certainly its key industrial sectors. It's going to have to lean on Europe again.
Okay.
By the way, we are not going for the F-16s or the F-35s. We are going for the Rafale.
Correct.
In some sense, even our most critical defense technologies today are still coming from Europe. Our subsea platform, submarines are also European, right? So I think Europe has a central role in our journey, and because they are smaller countries, no single one can be the kitchen for our table. We will have to have a coalition in Europe, and therefore the EU offers us a great opportunity to deal with such an ambition, right? Now they are rattled because look, the only truly non-aligned country in the world was, the geography was EU. EU was the only non-aligned country. Energy from Russia, security from America, markets from China. Yes. And virtues from God. So they dealt with all the four big powers of our time: China, Russia, America, and God. They kept everyone happy. They catered to biblical evangelism. They catered to the energy
wonderfully
needs,
said.
right? So I think they were strategic autonomy. Their name was EU. Yes. And we must aspire to be EU. We talk strategic autonomy, but we create strategic dependencies. They were truly autonomous. Now what has happened is one bad event, and suddenly the best laid out plans were upended, and therefore Europe is missing the fifth element that they never invested in: strategic fiber. They did not have their own strategic capabilities to be to flex their own muscles and to respond on their own, and therefore they realized that the perverse dependencies they had created, even as they exploited the richness of opportunities, is costing them today. Right. It does not mean that they are over. I mean, it just means that Europe is going to again rebalance.
Yes.
I think you've heard the new German Chancellor Merz speak about it. You've heard Macron speak about it.
We've heard the number of euros they're going to invest into defense.
Now, I think that is an interesting opportunity again for us.
Correct.
And I think in this new Europe that is likely to emerge in the coming decade, courtesy the shifting geopolitics of our times, but also because of the new powerhouses they have in the eastern part of that continent. Poland, for example, is the go-to economy. It is the fastest growing European economy. Its per capita income is now in Spain or higher than Spain. It's going to become the third or fourth or fifth richest country in Europe. Can you imagine?
Wow.
Poland, right?
It's incredible.
Look at that story. 1991, devastated. And look at the story today, right? So their journey is no less dramatic as ours in some sense. We were $400 billion turn of the century. We are $4.3 trillion sitting now, 9x in 25 years, right? So the Poland is the India of Europe. That's what I go and tell them. And in some sense, the new powerhouse.
And now they like it.
Yeah.
10 years back, they may not have liked it. Now they like it.
So I was there recently. So my point is, EU dramatic new pathways that they will have to embrace. Many of them will lead them to New Delhi. And I think we are each other's resilient mechanism.
Right, and we'll come to the opportunity part. I want to actually move to the third crisis, which is polarization. You have a new book out, and I'm just going to do a small plug for geotechnography, where you're saying that technology is redefining geography as well as power. We are remaining physically in our nations, but our issues are transnational, and there is immense concentration of power in the big tech companies. Right? Now, for a 25-year-old today who will be middle-aged, they don't want to hear this, but they will be middle-aged in the next 25 years. What does the world look like? Is it a dystopian Black Mirror future? Or again, will the inherent resilience of the human being be a force for technology to reckon with?
This is, if someone has the answer to this, there's a Nobel Prize waiting for, it's around the corner. It's very difficult, Monika. I think the jury is out. Geotechnography is asking us one set of questions. It's about, are we mature as societies today to be able to come up with a model of coexistence in a world where location no longer decides affiliation? Right. And I think that is the point. Right. Earlier, birds of feather flock together. The human settlements and thereafter cities and now states and perhaps even supranationals were built on the fact that there were a bunch of people who largely were similar. Largely. I'm not saying they were completely similar because evolution does not work in that manner, but who basically were in the same quadrant of existence. That means largely similar political arrangements they were comfortable with, largely similar economic arrangements they were comfortable with, and largely similar socio-cultural moorings in some sense. Today, you could be living together, but you could be de-anchored in all three of them.
Correct.
In fact, you might have a greater affiliation to a person in Napa Valley than the neighbor 50 meters from your home, or perhaps in the same apartment complex. Right. You might be more in touch with those 10,000 miles away than with your next door neighbor. थोड़ा चीनी है, थोड़ा दूध है, हमारा कल्चर खत्म हो गया है. हम Amazon में आज के दिन, we would rather order on that door delivery services. We would rather get chai and chini. Correct. We would rather get the yogurt from that fast delivery service than going and knocking on the neighbor's door and asking for jamun to put curd for the next day to get curd. So वो हमारा वो खत्म हो रहा है. So the book is really that one of the big philosophical questions of our time, that what is going to be the basis of aggregation in the real world at a time when large part of each of our individual lives and personalities are really defined by the cloud we inhabit. And here I mean the digital personas. We are in some disorganized but quite discernible clubs online. whether it is the Twitter or X platform, whether it is Instagram, whether it is the blogs you read, whether it is the news services you cater to, we are self-aggregating
These are
ourselves.
virtual rooms, these are virtual
These are,
communities,
the
and
walled gardens.
we are all card-carrying members of that.
So we have all
Yes.
joined a political party online.
There is a polarization.
Right. So in some sense, the challenge and the beauty of human beings is that we hate being boxed in, and yet we find safety of silos. So there is always a human ambition, and that is the creative part of each of us, the frontal cortex, that wants to shatter these silos and images that we build for ourselves, and yet we find safety in the cave. So we still have the primitive primal animal that likes the safe cave, and yet we are the exploratory human that wants to scan horizons. So in some sense, geotechnography is a clarion call for us to rethink and rise above the digital polarizations defined by platforms designed in California through constitutional arrangements that have shaped the thinking of that geography.
Correct.
That is now in many ways infiltrating our cultural bearing. So in many ways, when Indians start defending free speech like Americans do, I say this is an American here, right? So there are a number of Indians who today shout on television about an evangelical free speech, and I appreciate it, by the way. But we have some cultural moorings. We are too tightly packed in our diversity to keep poking each other in the nose and in the eyes. And therefore there was a reasonable code of conduct, a social code of conduct of not offending people beyond a certain level.
Which is also part of our culture.
They're part of our culture also. Ki hum nahi karenge. So the right to offend was never an Indian attribute, but I see a lot of Indian voices now defending right to offend. Now I am not against it. I think we should, as societies, have these big debates of how free should speech be, of how free should intellectual property and its defense be. We should have these big questions, because any formula that we agreed to 2000 years ago or even 75 years ago needs to constantly rejuvenate itself with fresh thinking. So the good thing about India is we are argumentative, we disagree, and that is our strength. It is also a weakness because it makes us slightly less efficient than we should be. But I would have this rich debate than have efficient outcomes in everything. So
what does middle age for a today's 25-year-old look like?
Invest and follow Monika. Your middle age.
No, they believe the world is getting over. That's why they don't want to save.
Boss, if the world got over, we would all be happier. The world is not getting over, and you will have to live in it. So invest in it. Read her books. Follow Monika and plan for your decades ahead. But let me just tell you, there are more opportunities that await you than any of us were able to experience. The world is going to be richer. Your biggest identity debates or identity politics of your life is not going to be religion. It's not going to be caste. It's not going to be language. It's going to be your debate with the machine. Be ready for dealing with machines, intelligent machines, and that is the identity debate of the future. Start thinking about it. How that debate begins? It begins with how you treat Alexa. Because one day Alexa will be treating you. So start, have that.
That's a Black Mirror dystopia.
Rethink your conversation with Alexa.
Stop abusing her.
Of the identity debate. Yeah, sorry. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, so absolutely. And it gives me a segue into the next part, which is opportunity. So we've spoken about the crisis, the opportunity. Like I said, we've become the BFF of the whole world suddenly. And there was a minister who recently really set the internet on fire by saying that our startups are good delivery boys and girls, but they're not into high tech. And then there was a barrage of pushback saying that, but you know what, you don't make doing business easier. There's corruption. We are really sapped by corruption, which is pervasive, which is everywhere. From the lowest municipal guy to whoever, there is a problem with that. So, what is this opportunity? Are we going to let it go? Because we do have this opportunity today. The world is changing, the rules are changing, and we are mired by this old bureaucracy, the judicial activism, and corruption. So where does this go?
Look, I followed that debate, and I was quite actually taken up by some positions that were expressed during that particular conversation. I think what was said about India in the last century is still valid. Everything you say about India is true, and the opposite is equally true. So that debate actually, in many ways, was interesting, manifestation of this reality. That yes, we have built technology services that are very rudimentary, but it is also true that the same country landed on the dark side of the moon. So to belittle our scientific and innovation progress can be clearly countered by facts. But it is also true that we have digitized the low end of value
but
creation.
isn't that how it begins?
But it is the journey of everyone.
That's right.
We love to be offended. That's what I'm saying. No, we right to offend and right to be offended. We like both of it now in India. We take offense on everything. Anyway, I'm not speaking for anyone who said it.
Sure.
All I want to say is that I will be the positivist here and the possibilist here. For me, I think the challenge and the gauntlet of that statement made by a political leader was that let's think bigger. And I think there is nothing wrong in urging us to be more ambitious and not sit on our laurels of accomplishments and rather be hungry for more. And I would take it in that spirit. And I think we have done a lot. Our scientific temper is established by some achievements. Our full realization of our scientific capabilities is certainly not being tapped into. So we are a glass half full. We are a glass half full, and we now need to do three things.
Difficulty of doing business, the corruption.
Yeah, I'm coming. So now we need to rethink three things. One, I think we still have a business unfriendly political system. So in some sense, the first thing that we really need to do is we need to stop treating businesses as milking cows and start looking at businesses as the architects of modern India. It is, I'm going to be unpopular in the political class. India is not going to be built by the parties of today. It is going to be built by the enterprises of tomorrow.
By the 25-year-old who's doing
Correct.
a startup.
The enterprises of tomorrow.
Absolutely,
that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
It is the enterprises of tomorrow that will be the makers of modern India. It will not be the parties of yesterday who are going to be shaping it. So in some sense, we have to have a new entente. Point number one. A new agreement between businesses and the political class, which see themselves as co-travelers in the journey towards a very prosperous India. Very similar to a more informal agreement that was reached in our freedom struggle between businesses of that time.
And that they can
do
through voting, donations. Like how do you exert your desire for political change?
The good news is, and here I think I see a silver lining. I don't think the political class wants to do that. They still want a subservient enterprise sector. That is a very feudal instinct that continues to reside in us.
Correct.
However, the good news is that as we have moved from $400 billion in 2000 to 4.4 trillion in 2025, in the 25 years, as our economy and our footprint has grown 9x, our institutions have grown barely by 2x. So which basically means increasingly governance is now going to happen outside of government, and the political class that is the owner of the government is increasingly going to have to lean on what's happening outside.
Already.
And the decentralization of governance is going to change the nature of the relationship between enterprise and politics, and it is happening at a faster clip in the last 10 years than ever before, and it is a factor of the...
Speak to me about corruption. This is something which personally riles me because
corruption for me is a product of one
and don't
essential.
Tell me it's oil on the wheel, because it is not.
No, look, I hate that.
I hate that argument.
I hate that argument.
Yeah.
It is the terrible distortion of valuing humans that leads to corruption. The power of decision making versus the promise of the responsibility. So decision making and responsibility have today been made, have parted ways. Right? Those with power have very little incentives to embrace responsibility. And this has happened for a number of reasons. One was the terrible populist politics that began at the time of our independence, which was to use the office to remain in office. Right? Today you come into office to remain in office. It is not to transform, and therefore power became your responsibility. and transformation was no longer part of the responsibility matrix. So I think for me, corruption is a product of this obsession with power. And like they said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. In India, from the upper divisional clerk to the cabinet minister, absolute power in their own domain has produced this.
And they have
terrible
messed the digital system. GST has been circumvented in
GST,
many cases.
Aadhaar,
So-
PAN number, take anything.
For a young person, at this age and stage, some of us feel that this is like we've played the wrong game. We are the donkeys of the system. We are jokers. Will this generation feel the same way?
Monika, I'm a big fan of Rosling. I'm not
Hans
Hans
Factfulness.
Rosling. I'm a big fan, and please read his book.
Oh yes,
Factfulness. Please read that
absolutely. In
book,
fact, that
all
was
of you.
last question was that you
Okay.
preempted me.
So I'm a big fan of his, and
Yes.
and
Wonderful book, fantastic. Factfulness, read
And
it.
people ask me, am I optimistic? Am I realist? Am I pessimist? No, I'm like Hans Rosling. I'm a possibilist. I look at possibilities, and possibilities excite me. I am happy that today smaller instances of corruption are being spoken about in radical ways. I like the fact that we are creating a noise. I tell everyone, when they see it, speak it.
And now you have the means.
And now you have
the
means.
platforms.
We need to amplify every instance. We should not partake in it. I can tell you something closer to home. I waited 6 months for someone in my family to get a PAN number rather than pick up the phone and request someone for it. I am not going to contribute to this culture that I need to call up someone to
Correct.
get something done. I have never called someone for my passport. I have never called someone for my visa. I have stood in the line, or I have used a digital medium, and I think all of us need to do that. By the way, I am not that pious as I want to make myself out to be. I have made lots of calls for other people, but I've never made it for myself but don't do it. I tell the young people, don't do this.
Don't be a part of
I
this.
am now, as I enter my 50s, 3 years ago, I've decided I will not do it. I will not partake in this. And when you see it, say it. Speak about it, shout it out loud. We have to shame people into behavior change. There is one thing we must acknowledge. One thing we have done well in some parts of the country is that we have eradicated spectacular corruption. We have not been able to, as a whole country, deal with systemic corruption.
This is the legacy of colonialism,
Correct.
right? So you feed off the people.
This is a scarcity mindset coupled with the concentration of power. Like I was just mentioning,
it's rent seeking.
It's
Just
rent seeking.
rent seeking.
And somehow it is an industry that has self-nourished itself.
Yes.
This tendency needs to actually be killed from within, and that can happen when all of us actually reject it, shame it, despise it. I think one of our biggest campaigns must be to shame corruption.
Swachh Bharat of a
Correct.
different kind.
Of a different
We need
kind.
a Swachh Bharat.
Of a
Okay,
different-
so last we'll wrap up with something that you want to say to them. This
Look,
generation who
this
is
generation
inheriting.
should know.
We are going to hand the baton over.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what. Say when I was in my middle 30s, and many of you in the next decade are going to be at that space. There was one economy that was $4 trillion. That economy had a per capita income of $2,600 per capita. That same country was to bail out Greece and Portugal and Italy in the next 5 years when they had a financial crisis. And that same $4 trillion economy in the next 10 years was to become the number one trading partner to over 100 countries. That country was China in 2008. Right. That country is India today in 2024.
Absolutely.
Over $4 trillion, $2,600 per capita income. In the next 10 years, India would have changed the lives of citizens in India, but in 100 other countries with how they engage with them and their economics and political system. You are going to shape the world. 21st century would never have had a more consequential story than India, and you are the story. Write it well.
Wonderful. On that note, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thanks, Monika.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know I did. Put two nerds around a table and what can go wrong? Why don't you write to us and tell us who you'd like to hear next and what sort of issues you want to know more about. So do subscribe and keep watching.